guys, welcome back to this series.
you remember in our previous lesson, that is Introduction to Programming in Data Structures,
Hey, welcome to Draft Academy. My name is Mike. In this course, I'm going to be teaching you guys everything you need to know to get started in the C programming language. C is an awesome programming language, and it's actually one of the oldest programming languages around. In fact, a lot of modern programming languages are based off of C. So it's a really good idea if you want to get into C, or even if you're trying to get into something like C++ to learn the basics. And in this course, we're going to cover everything you need to know. I'm going to talk to you guys about installing a text editor and using the C compiler, and we're going to write some basic code. I'll talk to you guys about, what is a program and how do programs work and how does C read the instructions that you give it. And we're going to get into some more advanced stuff. We're going to look at things like if statements and loops. We're going to create different variables. We're going to talk about the different types of data that you can use in C. Then we're going to get more advanced. We're going to talk about things like structures and functions. We're going to talk about pointers, and basically I'm just going to give you a full overview of all of the core concepts in C. So by the end of this course, you'll have a really good understanding and a really good foundation which you can build on. You can kind of go forward and learn some more. I'm really excited to be bringing you guys this basic course on C. I'm really excited for you guys to dive in and start using these tutorials. So feel free to click around through all the videos, and hopefully you'll learn something awesome about C. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about getting everything set up to start programming in C. Now, in order to program in C, we're actually going to need two things. The first thing we're going to need is an environment where we can write our C programs. Now, there's a bunch of these different environments. Essentially, all you need is just a text editor. So anything that can allow you to write text and then save that text in a specific file format is going to work. Although, when we're working with C, a lot of times it can be useful to use a special environment called an IDE. And IDE stands for Integrated Development, called code blocks, instruction, trans to box C to write our C programs and release. Then we're going to block to dot into these blocks. So it'll be the two programs we can, and let's just to run it. It's a settler, and I'm just going to click set as default and click OK. And there you go, we now have code blocks installed. So in the next few tutorials, we're going to be learning about setting up code blocks, writing our first. C programs, and really just getting started with C. Right, when that's set up the program, and you can see it's gone ahead and downloaded that to give us both of them on Windows. So I'm going to come with a C compiler. So remember I said we needed those two programs, we needed those two things. And this is actually going to give us both of them on Windows. So install a, we want to download Windows. So if you're on Windows, options here, one says download the binary release, download the source code. We want to click on download the binary release. This time on Windows, so I'm going to come down here to the Windows option. You'll see there's, for Mac, you can install it from this page. So depending on the operating system that you're on, you want to click that. I'm on Windows. So I'm going to come down here to the Windows code blocks, and then the version number, and then it says min gw-setup. Basically what this is we needed those SourceForge.net, and you can see things, and this is actually going to give us both of them on Windows. So I'm going to come over here and click on the link to download this from SourceForge.net, and you can see it's gone ahead and downloaded that. So now let's head over to our downloads folder, and I'm just going to double click on this setup program, so this should open up a window where we can set up the program. And let's just click through this, so I'm just going to click next, I'm going to agree to the license, and basically just leave all the options as default, and you should be good to go. All right, when that's done installing, it's going to ask us to run code blocks, so we can just go ahead and do that. I'm going to agree to the license, and basically just leave, I'm just going to double click on this setup here, and click on the link to open up. All right, when that's done installing, and let's just click through this, so I'm just going to click next, I'm going to agree to the license, and basically just leave all the options as default, and you should be good to go. All right, when that's done installing, it's going to ask us to run code blocks, so we can just go ahead and do that. And it's giving me this little window here, the option to click on the default getting started. Everything's set up, need two things. Programs, so right, and we're doing good. Our C program. The terminal is basically a program that allows us to interact with the computer using text commands. So we're actually that's what program person to default. Here, let's run through this, download that next. I'm going to agree to them on Windows. So I'm going to come over here and click on the link to download this from SourceForge.net, and you can see it's gone ahead and downloaded that. So now let's head over to our downloads folder, and I'm just going to double click on the default compilers. Start with C, our program things. The first thing we're going to need is a text editor. Basically, we're going to use video. In this tutorial, in order to start working with C, we're actually going to need two things. The first thing we're going to need is a text editor. Basically, we're going to use the text transformed into a language in C, basically a special environment where we can go to write a text editor. And this video will basically show you how to get everything set up. In order to start working with C, we're actually going to need two things. The first thing we're going to, but there's actually a instant command. So you go over to the right side here, you'll see here, program. I'm going to open up my code block program, and this is the IDE that we're existing button right here, where you can go up to, these are different types of C projects that you can create. What we're going to be doing is creating this wizard, and see the next project and code, so I'm going to click down, and you'll see over here we have some default code. So up here there's these little lines of code that say include, down here that says int main. So this is the program that we're given by default when we created our C project, and this is sort of like the simplest C program that you can run. Essentially what this program does is it prints out hello world onto the screen. So in order to run this program and test it to make sure that everything's working, I'm going to come up here, and you'll see that there's this green play button over here that just just says run when I hover over. When I click this button, this file that we have open right here, main.c, is going to get run. So we're essentially telling code blocks to run this file and execute the program. So when I click the run button, we're getting this message that says the project has been built. Yeah, do you want to build it? Yes. And now over here, this little window pops up. Basically, this is the command prompt. So whenever I run a C program and instruction into point, we just have to result in our program. Name, it's just going to get executed on this program. Those brackets. It's going to come in to talk about actually running the program. Essentially taking the second thing we have computer to execute that allows us to run our program. See how your program options. The console window, you can come and execute it. This is the cool things about this C down here, the off to the 17. Now we're basically going to be done with that instruction. We want to run the next one. So I can actually copy this instruction. We're not only printing it out once, but we'll put this first instruction into a more complicated we know print F string. Maybe 4 times. Print F, left, and I'll make another one, and I'll make another one. You can see here I've drawn like a little diagonal line with these melody. Anytime I print this, we're going to execute each one of these instruction order matters. So if we're printing out this instruction, and not because we changed up the order of the first instruction, now this is going to get printed in the order in which it executed. The program complexity instruction print F as a variable that we're going to want tables come in. A variable is essentially a container where we can store different pieces of information, so different data programs. So I'm going to show you guys basically how variables can be useful and how we can use them in our C program. He really liked the name George, but did not like being 70. So this is a simple program. Great. But let's say him like jump plugin, and that sounds pretty good. And every place where we mention the character's age and change it to the new story program that has character's age, basically just grab every type of. There's a bunch of different types. We're going to create this variable. It's going to store after we basically one character. So close quotation char character name. We're going to have to make an open and closed square bracket. And that's in order to store a bunch of characters inside of this variable. After we type the variable's name, we're going to have to make an open and closed square bracket. And that's going to tell C that we want to store a bunch of characters inside this variable. So I'm going to type char character name, open and close square brackets. I'm going to set this equal to something. So I'm essentially assigning a value to this variable. And then in the variable, I want to shift character verb. I'm going to type number. So in our story, I'm storing an integer. Now I'll type out 30 print, and I'm going to replace it with a percent. And basically now over here, I'm going to make a comma, and here it's text. And we can actually use this print F instruction in order to do that. So I'm going to show you guys how to do this, and then we're going to talk about it. So basically, I'm going to go over here where we have the character's name. I'm going to erase this, and I'm going to replace it with a percent sign and an S. Now over here, I'm going to make a comma, and I'm just going to type in the variable name. So I'm going to type in character name. And basically what's happening, right, you see, a string is basically just a collection of characters. So I could call this up here use this n character name, actually S here. Remember, instead of using %s, I'm going to use %d. It's a variable that we're doing similar, I'm going to say %. But now, because I have a number, instead of using %s, I'm going to use %d. And that basically means that we're going to insert an integer number into here. So I'm saying he was %d years old, and over here I'm going to make a comma, and I'm just going to type out the name of %d, and let's go ahead and run our program, and now you'll see it's going to look exactly the same as it did before. It's the same story, same name. It's cool about it, and we can also change their age. In our case, we can see 7, and now when I run my program, all of that's going to get updated in the story. So now it's variable like 10 or 20 or 30 times, modify it in one place. So another spot would be extremely difficult. So variables are great because we can store the value one time, and then if we want to modify it, we just modify it in one place. So another cool thing that we can do with these variables is we can actually modify them. So let's say that halfway through the story, I wanted to change the character's age. I can actually come down here, I can make a new line, and right above these print statements, I can give this variable a new value. So I could say character age, and I can just set it equal to something else. So we can set it equal to like 30. And again, we want to include that semicolon. So now halfway through the story, the character's age is actually going to change. So you'll see it says there once was a man named Tom, he was 67, and then down here the age is being 30. So we actually modified the value that was stored inside of the variable halfway through printing out our storing a collection or a number. Programs are going to be dealing with all sorts of information. What are the different types of data that we can work with in our program? So I'm going to show you guys all those different data types right now. So a lot of times in C, when we're working with data, we're going to be storing that data inside of variables. So I'm just going to show you guys a bunch of different variables that we can create and all the different types of data that we can store inside of those variables. So remember, whenever we create a variable in C, we have to tell C a couple pieces of information. And the first piece of information we need to tell C is what type of data that we want to store inside of that container, inside of that variable. So let's talk about the different types of data. One of the most basic types of data, and probably one of the types of data you're going to be using the most, is going to be numbers. There's actually two very important types of numbers that we can represent in C. So the first type is called an integer, and an integer is basically a whole number, numbers. There's actually two very important types of numbers of data. One of the most basic types of data, and probably one of the types of data you're using the most, is going to be numbers. There's actually two. So let's talk about the different types of data. One of the most basic types of data, and probably one of the types of data you're going to be using the most, is going to be numbers. There's actually two very important types of numbers that we can represent in C. So the first type is called an integer, and an integer is basically a whole number. So it's running in whole numbers. Now, whenever we number types of an integer, and now we actually have 8.2. There's a double. So I'm just going to type out double, and this could be like someone's GPA, for example, might be like 3.7 or whatever. So you can use the double to represent decimal numbers. It's also important to note that I can also represent like number 3. So I can just say like 3.0, and that's going to be a decimal. Or I could say 40.0. So the difference between 4 is that I can also represent like the number 3. So I can double there's integers and characters inside of a variable. Specify the characters that we want to store inside of F. Basically, it's important to know that with these 3 data types, we can represent all sorts of information. I also want to talk to you guys about one sort of extra data type, and it's not technically a data type in C. It's technically like a modification of the character data type. So you notice when we create a character, we can only strings and strings. And this is basically I'm going to type out the name of the string that I want to create. So I can say like phrase. And then after this, I can make an open and close square brackets. And this is basically going to tell C that we want to string a bunch of characters together. And what we're actually doing is creating something called an array. And I'm going to get into arrays later in the course. But just for now, noting 2 open and close, and this will get stored and different from the data in its we've been using in our C programs at how we can printf. And we're going to make an open and close parentheses and a semicolon. A printf is what's called a function. Basically what that means is printf. And we're going to make an open and closed parentheses and a semicolon. Now printf is what's called a function. And basically what that means is it performs a specific task or a specific function. In our case, printf just prints something out on the screen, right? The task that it's doing is printing something out. And it basically works how you'd expect it to work. So if I came in here, I could print out a specific piece of information. And generally when we're using printf, we're going to be printing out text. So I can make an open and closed quotation marks, and I can print out like hello world in here. Now this will print out on the screen, hello. Now this will print out a new line. So you'll see hello world. Notice that it's messing this up, so it's for my program, counting this as the entire string. If I wanted to change that, I can just put a backslash here, and now this will literally render a quotation mark. So I run my program, and see we have a quotation. It's actually extremely good information. For example, this would actually allow me to print a number, so data. It's not just plain text like this. So if I said percent sign and then I said D, this would actually allow me to print out a number. So generally when we use these format specifiers, it uses percent sign, and that tells C that you're going to want to print out something special. And then after that, we would type in a specific letter, and that'll tell C what exactly we want to print out. So if I said percent D, this means that we want to print out an integer. So all I have to do now is I can make a comma, and over here, I can specify the integer that I want to print out. So I can say like 500. And now this is going to print out 500 to the screen. So you can see over here, we're getting 500. And this is cool because we can interweave these different types of data with text. So I can say like my favorite number is percent D, and this acts as a placeholder for this number over here. In addition to just using this, percent S is basically going to allow us to include some. Now this is going to print out my favorite percent S, and you'll notice here that I'm using multiple commas. So I'm saying like percent S, percent D, and over here I have a comma, and I'm specifying the string that I want to print is the order that you need to include them using these commas. So you're going to separate each of them using a comma. So in addition to percent S and percent D, we can also use a string vector that's going to look for, and similarly, in addition here, text. So I can say like print out 500. I can make a comma, and that'll tell C what it uses percent. My function is actually and printing out text. So I can, and it basically works with specific tab. We're going to make an open and close parentheses, print here, make a value, see print mark. So if I set the int as a multiple, you'll notice here there's, and then using personal number. So my favorite difference is 90 variable. So I can use this variable and print it out inside of this printf. So over here we can make this percent D. Instead of printing out this number, we can just access that variable. So I can say fav num, and this will allow me to print out that variable using that printf function. So my favorite number is 90. So that's the basics of variables. So I can say fav num, and it's cool that we can keep doing. So use percent lowercase will allow you to print out a single character. So I can come over here create like a character variable. We'll call it my char. Just set it equal to like lowercase I, and I can print this out using percent C. So now we can say my char and programs. When we're writing programs in C, we're going to want to do different things with numbers. That's just storing numbers and keeping track of them, or adding, multiplying, subtracting, doing it. Now, a lot of times in this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about working with numbers in C. Now, a lot of times when we're writing programs in C, we're going to want to do different things with numbers, whether that's just storing numbers and keeping track of them, or adding, multiplying, subtracting, doing math with numbers, or really just dealing with numbers in general. So I'm just going to give you guys a basic overview of a lot of the stuff we can do with numbers. We're also going to talk about how different number types interact, so how like integers and doubles interact and all that fun stuff. Down here, I am printing out a number. So you can see I'm using this printf function, and inside of these quotation marks, I'm basically saying percent F. Percent F stands for like floating point number, so that can be either a double or a float, basically a decimal number. So when we put percent F in here, it's going to allow us to print out a decimal number, just like this. And you can see I can run my program, and it'll print out 8.9. You'll notice that it's printing out not just 8.9, but it's also printing it out to a very precise number, just like this. And you can see I can run my program, and it'll print out 8.9. You'll notice that it's printing out not just 8.9, but it's also printing it out to a very precise decimal point. And that's what C is always going to do. So it's always going to print it out to a very precise decimal. So you not just 8.9, but it's also printing it out to a very precise decimal point. And that's what C is always going to do. So it's always going to print it out to a very precise decimal. So using these decimals, I can do all sorts of stuff. So obviously I can just print out the decimal. That's always going to do. So it's always going to print it out to a very precise decimal. So using these decimals, I can do all sorts of stuff. So obviously I can just print out the decimal, but I can also do things like math. So I can say like 5.0 plus 4.5. And this is going to go ahead and be able to do that for us. When I run my program, not only is it going to print this out, it's going to do the actual math operation. You see we get 9.5. So in addition to addition, we can also do subtraction, division, which is going to be a 4. I want to talk about how double. So if I said 5, which is an integer, plus 4.5, we're going to get a floating point number back. So we're going to get 9.5. And basically any operation that you do between now, this isn't going to work anymore because this is asking for a floating point number and we're giving it an integer. So when I do math, that's important to realize. But if I was to change this to 4, now this isn't going to work anymore because this is asking for a floating point number and we're giving it an integer. So when I do math with 2 integers, it's going to give us an integer back. And if I do math with a floating point number and integer, it'll give us a floating point number back. It's also important to realize, for example, really this like the answer of the integer 5 divided by the integer with a bunch of decimal points after it, right? It's 1 plus a bunch of other stuff. But now we're going to get the entire. In addition to just having 1.25 here, I can specify a variable like num set equal to 6, and we can go ahead and print num out down here as well. We need to make this a D. So now we'll be able to print out that variable with no problem. So we have these things called give us information using these functions, and all you have to do anything, so we can use comment functions, square root of 36, this is going to give us a decimal number back. Raised to the third power and square root. So if I said like 36 in here, now we're going to print out the square root of 36, which is going to be 6. And there's a couple other ones. This is going to give us the next highest number. So it'll basically round this number up. And this is going to give us 37. It's 5, 6. This will round it down to 36. So there's all sorts of little things we can do, or sometimes they'll like give us information, numbers and numbers. So that's so play around with these little functions that you can use. Comments in C, widely used. There's like dozens of these little functions that you can use, but I think these are some of the most widely used. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you guys about using comments in C. A comment is a special block of code in C, which actually gets ignored when we run our program. So if you want to write a comment, you can use a special starting and ending tag, and any of the text, any of the code, anything that you put inside of that tag isn't going to get executed to a comment using for this / asterisk. It's going to be considered a inside of these RAM, and so I could leave a little in order to excode it with these comment tags, and now the computer is just going to ignore it, so leave the line, just comment it out. So a lot of times when you're writing programs, you might want to try to run your program without typing by C, and then write by the value that's stored inside of the num var, and then we print it out in comparison, and here it's constant. Also, it's got a number too, like let's say we're going to print out 70. 70 is also considered a constant. So it's just considered to be like a piece of information or a piece of data in our program that is sort of unchanging, right? So 70, this isn't going to change. I mean, unless I physically came in here and changed it, like this value is always going to just been kind of using for basically a first is data. Void, I'm just going to call it consider close around isn't from inside of the function again. So what's happening is when C goes to execute this program, it's going to execute this first line of code. Print out, so it's going to print out, and it's going to execute all 5 times you have a function, just a value, parenthesis, a string of characters called name, called my array, and my more obvious, I can say hello Mike, hello Tom, hello, especially if you're storing data that is very similar. So like I said, I can do this celebrity. So I'm going to show you guys one way that we can actually break this program. Transfer color is a little bit different than and letting the user enter in only integers, why don't we instead let them enter in doubles? So over here I'm going to change these to double. We just typed in like the name. I think it's and it's a variable. I'm going to create an int over here, it's called age, and I'm not going to give this a value. So all I'm going to do up here is basically going to allow the user to input something, to enter an installation into our program from the user. So I can use another function which is called scanf. Right now it's putting something out onto the screen. Scanf is allowing the user to input something. So in our case, we're asking for an integer, right? Age is going to be an integer. I'm basically going to tell C what variable I want to store this in. So I'm going to store this inside of my age variable. And I can essentially just type out the name of the variable here. But in order to get input from the user, I'm actually going to have to type an ampersand in front of this. So instead of just typing out age, I'm going to have to type ampersand age. And when I say ampersand age, this is what's called a pointer. And we're going to talk about pointers in a later tutorial. I'm going to cover everything we need to know about pointers. But for now, that's a little bit beyond what we need to learn. So all you need to know is if you're using scanf and you want to store information inside of like an integer or a float or like a character, you need to use this ampersand over here. So down here, now that we've scanned for the user's age, I'm just going to go ahead and print it out. So we'll just print out like you are, and I'll say percent D years old. And over here, I'm scanned for the user's age. I'm just going to go ahead and print it out. So we'll just print out like you are, and I'll say percent D years old. And over here, I'm just going to print out that age. So essentially, what I'm doing is I'm programming and see how we import it inside of that age code. We're going to call this GPA. And now I can do the same thing. So now instead of asking for an integer, we're going to be asking for a double. So I can come up here and say like double and call this GPA. And now I can do the same thing. But instead of saying D, I want to say LF. And LF is basically double. So I can come up here and say like double and call this GPA. And now I can do the same thing. But instead of saying D, I want to say LF. And LF is basically going to tell the scanf function that we're looking for an application. Why don't we create this with GPA over here and we'll just call it grade. And we'll say enter your grade. And now when we want to get a character, we'll just say percentage and set grade. And we'll go ahead and print out. So now we should be able to get a character. So enter the grade, let's say I got A, and set grade. So once you got you guys one more thing again. And so that's how we'll just here and print your GPA function. So for example, I can say, you see over here it says you are 50 years old. So that's how we can get an integer from the user. So we're prompting the user to enter their age, use it to learn. So I'm going to store this inside the user to input that will be input. So 10 data from game, just going to print out printing it out. It's old. So that's how we can get state. I'll just have so 1% grade. And then down here we from input from the addition to getting a number. We want to be able to put a number in there. Well, you right away actually need an outlier. We'll just say yes. And over here the name of the string. And then over name is Mike. Print out the print F. Your grade is. This should work just like it did in the other cases. So let's go ahead and run this. And we'll just say %s. And then over here we can print out the name. So this should work just like it did in the other cases. So let's go ahead and run this. And it says enter your name. So my name is Mike. And you'll see it says your name is Mike. It's work just like it did in the other cases. So is. I'm going to say %s, and then over here we can print out the name. So this should work just like it did in the other cases. So let's go ahead and run this, and it says enter your name. So my name is Mike, and you'll see it says your name is Mike. So that worked. My name was John Smith. When I click enter, you'll notice that it's only saying your name is John. I use it with a kind of a prompt. But there's another function which I want to show you guys, which we can use to get a line of FGATs. Is essentially just going to grab like a string of characters. So when we're using FGATs, the first argument we want to give it is the name of the variable where we want to store the line of text. So in order to store it inside of like a string of characters. So when we're using FGATs, the first argument we want to give it is the name of the variable where we want to store the line of text. So in our case, it's just going to be this name input, flow the buffer to accept. So I'm just doing over here is we're telling exactly what scan from this program, and it says enter your name. So now if we entered in John Smith, you'll see it's able to store multiple words instead of just one single word. So let's run this program. And it says the input inside of this name variable, but now we'll be able to store multiple words instead of just one single word. So let's run this program, and it says enter your name. So now if we entered in John Smith, you'll see it's able to enter in John Smith. Now, the one downside with just using this fgets is you notice that it printed out this new line over here. So let me actually demonstrate this a little bit. So if I was to print out like, just some random text over here, whenever I get input using scanf, so if I entered in John Smith, when I click the enter key, so when I'm entering this by clicking the enter key, that's actually going to represent a new line character, and that's going to get stored inside of the string. So when I click enter, you'll notice it says your name is John Smith, and then it prints out a new line character and it prints out this text. So that's just something that you need to be aware of when you're using this fgets function. But for the most part, I would say if you're getting input from a user in the form of a string, you can use fgets. You could also use scanf, and you could use multiple %s's. And I'm actually going to show you guys how we could do something like that in a future tutorial. But for the most part, I would say whenever you're getting a string from the user, you just want to use fgets.
Hands in the air, nobody needs to get hurt. She is my lady in gold, and we'll go all the way. Close up the safe, the time to meet is here. We'll tell your friends we got lost. Let's make our getaway now. Let's make our getaway now. Let's make our getaway. Hand on my heart, I let it fall out of crime, but I would give it all back for you. I thought away, find a way. Leaving behind tonight with Bonnie and Clyde. We'll take our chance on the run. Let's make our getaway now.
Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new tutorial series on this channel where I'm going to be covering the C++ language for beginners. Before long is the information without me, don't worry, I will teach you, explain everything, and if there's going plus different than kind of cover things in the tutorial language, and I just thought this would be kind of information, but I love explaining stuff to people to kind of cover on that beak here, show you how to program it would. So first, I would argue that it's not that hard to learn, of being a very difficult programming language. I tend to use Python. However, if you want to get nice syntax highlighting, install steps are going to be a little, or you need for this. So there's this on our drive. So install. So it should be by default. You should see the Ming GW in a second. So you type G++ and just press OK again, and then work after you go through those steps. So now you should on a executable file. So by default, whenever you write C++ code, you can't just run that code. That is just, plain text on your computer. The computer doesn't understand that. So what the compiler does is it takes this code, it translates it into machine language or into a binary language that it translates it into machine language or into a binary language that that your computer can actually understand. Now, this new file that you create must have a .cpp file extension. CPP stands for C++. Changes to desktop, Control S, and then what you want to do is you want to compile this file. So to compile this file, you need to open up your terminal or your command prompt, depending on the operating system you're on, and you need to navigate to the directory you're storing this file in. So I've created a folder on my desktop. It's called C++ tutorial. Inside, I have my file tutorial1.cpp. So open up your terminal, open up your command prompt, and you need to use the cd command, which stands for change directory, to get into the directory where this file is contained. So a little bit of a shortcut if you're on Windows here is if you just go to the directory from your file explorer like you normally would. So let's go to C++ tutorial, and then you go here. So this little search bar, and you delete all of this and you type cmd. This will open up the command prompt in this location. So notice the location is where we just were, and then you're good to go. So if you're on Mac, you're probably going to be in some directory that is not your desktop. You're probably going to be in your user's home directory, which means you should have something like users and then whatever your name is or something like that. So what you're going to do is you're going to navigate to wherever you're storing this file. So if it's on your desktop, for example, you're going to type cd desktop, and then that's going to bring you to your desktop. So let's actually just go ahead and do this. Ignore the 2 lines I just typed. Let's say I'm on Mac and I'm in this area. I type cd desktop. I go to my desktop. Notice now the path changes to desktop. Then I'm going to type cd, and I'm going to go to whatever directory this file is contained in. So maybe you have a folder called C++ tutorial. By the way, you can type the first few characters of whatever you want to go and press tab, and it should autofill it. So if I do C and then tab, it autofills C++ tutorial. So go ahead and press enter. And now from here, you should be good to go. So just navigate using cd, which stands for change directory, to the directory